The structure of LittleBigPlanet 2's story mode has made quite a few changes since the first game to accommodate for its more interesting storyline and characters, where the game has fewer worlds, but more levels overall, with most of them being much longer and more complex than they've ever been. This change has made LBP2's main levels the perfect subject to analyze and create a ranking out of, with how much more depth there is now to each of the 31 stages. So this list is primarily based around how fun the gameplay is in each level, as well as the visuals, theming, and overall presentation that comes along with it. With all of that in mind, let's take a look at our first level. Number 31. Got the Hump. This is probably the one level that I'm the most confident with the ranking of on this list, as this is without a doubt the worst level in the game, where I would be surprised if many people disagreed. The level is made up of one long auto-scroller that has you and your friends riding a camel that shoots lasers from its mouth. Throughout the auto-scroller, you're made to shoot various targets and enemies to protect yourselves and the camel, until reaching a boss fight at the end. This is really the only level that I would call bad. Its production quality is pretty much up to the standard of the rest of the levels in the game, but the problem is that it's just so incredibly boring, as it can literally take up to 6 minutes to beat even while doing everything properly. I already don't enjoy auto-scrollers at all, but giving us one that's this long with such little variety in gameplay is just a drag. Even the boss fight isn't that interesting. And hopefully you don't miss any prizes on the first attempt because there's no going back, which makes me think it probably wouldn't be so bad if you could control the movement of the camel, but you can't, forcing you to watch it walk super slowly. I guess there are some small things I like though, such as being able to shoot Avalon, the song New Family playing at the beginning, and the well-known Easter egg where inputting the Konami code while on the camel gives it a pair of glasses and even changes the music. Number 30. Flying in the Face of Danger. And unsurprisingly, my pick for the second worst level in the game is another auto-scroller, and trust me, there's a couple more to go through after this. But despite only being one place above the previous level, this one is actually way more fun for a variety of reasons. The level again involves using an animal to fire projectiles at enemies, but this time there's a lot more focus put on dodging and moving through physical obstacles due to the bee's free movement, which overall is pretty enjoyable to use, so it makes sense that nothing really happens if you don't kill any enemies. The beginning of the level is quite slow, which can be pretty boring, but once it speeds up this isn't really an issue, where it can be pretty satisfying blasting open the barriers while going so fast. Overall though, this is still just an auto-scroller where you're just waiting for something to happen most of the time, making it nowhere near as fun as most other levels. Number 29. Flight of the Bumblebees. This level is extremely similar to the last one, as it's another auto-scroller that uses the exact same bee vehicle, which means we're pretty much doing all of the same things as before, dodging obstacles and shooting enemies. I think this level is better though, as it has pretty unique visuals and more interesting gameplay, with even the inclusion of a boss at the end. The silhouettes against the bright orange background really stand out and go well with the blocky style of everything, and the various bright pink objects that you interact with. All of the different moving obstacles, especially in the second half, make for a lot of interesting challenges for the player to get around, and the level doesn't often repeat itself. I especially like the walls that need to be shot at to get past, and the enemies are also a lot more of a threat this time around, where it's easy to die from them if you're not careful, which includes the boss. It isn't too hard since its weak spots are constantly open, but dodging its blocks is pretty tough. Number 28. Kling Klong. The first dedicated boss level on this list comes from Victoria's Laboratory, which is kind of disappointing being this low because it's one of my favourite worlds. But in my opinion, this boss fight just doesn't offer much for it to be very interesting. There are 3 phases to the fight, and in each one of them you're pretty much doing the same thing. The first involves avoiding electricity and throwing cakes, the second has you dodging marshmallows and throwing cakes, and in the third, you avoid electricity and throw cakes. Except now there are bounce pads. It is cool how throughout the level you're gradually climbing the building, only to have the boss fall off at the very top, but overall, it really just doesn't have much going for it for me to place it very high. I do quite like the design of the boss though, with the whole thing being a giant mechanical spider. Its giant feet that can stick to the walls is really cool, and the pistons attaching the legs to its body are also a nice detail. Number 27. Rookie Test. This is a tutorial level, so it shouldn't be too surprising seeing it this early on. But funnily, this level actually has us doing way more than anything before this since we can finally run around. After some simple jumps, the biggest section of the level mostly teaches us about layer changes, which isn't the most fun thing, but shortly after is where the bounce pads are introduced, and they're always fun. Some of them are even on an angle. There really isn't much to say about this level though. But like the rest of the Da Vinci levels, the amount of detail and effort put into the visuals throughout the whole thing is super impressive. Creating an entire world based around Da Vinci and his workshop is a super cool concept, and they've done it super well here. You even see the Mona Lisa at the beginning. It's also neat how this level gets its own dedicated music. Number 26. Up and Atom. Thankfully, this is pretty much the last auto-scroller that we'll be talking about. But despite being my favorite one, it still can't place that high because it still is a little boring. This level actually has a bit of an introduction before the auto-scroller, which is pretty nice, but it's not long before you have to start riding on a caterpillar. But I think what makes this level so nice is mostly its theming, as the natural forest-like environment has been constructed super well, going perfectly with the charming idea to have the player act as an insect climbing up a big tree, which unfortunately is slightly on fire. But this actually makes for a nice amount of challenge within the level, as it can be difficult to take the route that you want while avoiding all of it, as well as the evil sackbots that have inhabited the tree. I really like how this section goes inside of the tree, making everything darker as a result. It adds some nice progression and character to the level, and it really shows how much of the tree has been infected with how deep the meanies have gone. What really makes this auto-scroller stand out gameplay-wise though, is that it actually uses more than one layer unlike the other ones. This lets you have some pretty cool overlapping sections that makes you choose between two split paths, making for a pretty solid level, despite being an auto-scroller. Number 25. Grab and Swing. We're still in tutorial territory for this level, so there might not be a whole lot to say again. But this is the first time in the game where we get access to a power-up, so we have that to look forward to. The first half is pretty similar to Rookie Test, where all of the obstacles are super basic to get past. The Skate to Victory ramp is pretty fun, and there are bounce pads, but they don't offer anything new. It's after going through the level link where this level starts to get better, as we now have access to the grappling hook, which in my opinion is the most fun power-up. While the obstacles are still pretty basic, they immediately become more interesting, with the section after the race gate being the best part, especially because of the wheel. Overall, this level is pretty much in the middle of being an uninteresting tutorial and actually having interesting gameplay. So in the end it kind of falls a bit flat, but it's still a little fun. Number 24. Introduction. This entire level really is the perfect intro to this new version of LBP, with all of its more advanced tools and technological theming, while still paying respect to the original game's style and charm. Just like before, we get to meet all of the amazing people behind the game in amusing and interactive ways. Seriously, they're like everywhere. I doubt I could even show all of the little sections like this. But to name a few, I really love the Space Invader type section that even has the arcade machine in the background, the moving cars plus other vehicles, and also the gallery of photographs on the wall towards the end. I don't think there's any other game in existence that shows just how much love was put into it within the first minute of gameplay like this one does. I feel like it just represents the whole series and its concept so well. The music is also a really nice addition, being a more digital cover of Left Bank 2, that again fits in really well. The gameplay isn't super interesting for this one, but that's to be expected. There's so much going on visually that it doesn't really matter though. I wish I could talk about all of it. The flying things at the start, the dancing speakers, the cloud following Sackboy, it's all perfect. And then at the very end, there's even a cutscene that transitions you into the story of the game where we meet our main antagonist. Number 23. Full Metal Rabbit. This level is kind of weird to me because I feel like it should be a lot higher on the list considering there's just as much gameplay variety as a lot of other levels, but for some reason I just don't like it that much. The first half is really fun with how you chase the meanie all the way down to his contraption, and timing your movement with the enemies after is really cool too, even with the bounce pads. The second half with the bunny is pretty fun as well. It can be quite satisfying flying through the air and taking out several enemies at once, and overall the level is a pretty nice length. I think the reason I don't really like it that much though is mainly due to the visuals and how linear the level feels. I know everything's meant to look dark and messy, but something about it puts me off, which is weird because there's a similar level where this isn't a problem. And yeah, the whole thing to me just feels like we're locked down to a single path until the end without much to explore, and overall making me feel claustrophobic and uninterested. Visually anyway. I don't think the gameplay has this problem. Number 22. Final Test. And here's another boss fight level, except this time there's quite a bit more to do to defeat it. It's actually a nice introduction to boss fights as there's a nice progression of difficulty with how the stage gradually changes throughout the fight, with even needing to use the grappling hook towards the end, making for a decently entertaining level. But only decently, since when you step back, it is just a lot of running back and forth, pulling levers and pushing buttons. The most exciting part is really just swinging around at the end to get the final hit on the boss. I wish there was more of that. It would have been cool if you needed to swing on him a bit more. But like Kling Klong, how the boss actually looks is pretty cool too and worth talking about. I'm not sure why it's a big monkey, but I really like it, and being able to see different parts of it like its arms and legs and having those actually play a role in the fight is really cool, where the electricity is being held by the hands and the feet reset the levers. It is a good final test for everything that you've learnt up to this point. Number 21. Huge Peril for Huge Spaceship. This might actually be my favourite level for how little you actually do in it, because pretty much the whole time you're just pressing X over and over to shoot projectiles. But it's just so satisfying. The B vehicle returns from one of the previous levels, and we're presented with a boss fight that has 3 phases, where all you need to do is shoot the weak spots and avoid the lasers. It is a bit short, so I feel like there probably was more that could have been done with this, which is why it's in this position. But there's just something so fun about being able to press a button as fast as you can to see hundreds of points rack up in seconds until causing a literal explosion, which then gives you even more points. And like the bosses before this, the main design being based on an animal makes for a lot of interest. Especially here, because I wouldn't typically expect a lobster to be flying around and shooting lasers. The evil sackbots doing random movements in the chair looks really funny too. Number 20. Avalon's Advanced Armaments Academy. The entire point of this level is to properly introduce the player to the Controlinator, and I have to say that it does this quite well with the 3 vehicles that have been created here. The bunny and the hamster give us fun and interesting new methods of movement, and the dog provides us with the type of projectile that can push obstacles. All of these different abilities get utilized pretty well with all of the different design elements that the level has to offer, like slamming down through enemies, pushing blocks to create a staircase, and blasting through walls that get in the way. All of which are super enjoyable and satisfying to use, and this isn't even close to everything that the level has to offer. The whole thing takes place inside of this futuristic testing facility, which makes perfect sense. I really like the clean look that even the music goes along with too. The only downside for me is the lack of non-Controlinator oriented gameplay, but that might not be a problem for everyone. Number 19. Maximum Security. This is one of several levels that has quite a big focus on working with sackbots to progress, which is a concept that I quite like. But this is also the first level that uses the factory theming, which has to be one of my favorites. From the beginning, the tone of the world is set up super well with the lifeless sackbots and the harsh industrial surroundings. Not to mention Clive, who fits in well here and adds quite a lot to the theming in my opinion. It's always fun starting off with the grappling hook section, which uses a pretty interesting transition into the next part of the level. But after riding the elevator, we find some sackbots that we need to take control of, as these ones actually like to run away from the player. And while I did say that I like the idea of having to interact with sackbots to complete a level, I don't find it the most enjoyable here. Quite a lot of the challenges just involve throwing the sackbots at some kind of target with the use of the grabinators, which gets a little old and sometimes even takes longer than it needs to because of how they run away. Probably the most annoying thing about it is just how easy it is for one or more of the sackbots to get on the wrong side of you, which isn't too hard to fix, but it's still just an inconvenience. It's sort of made up for in the end though when they get converted. I actually think this is really cool. But my favourite thing about this level is probably the use of pipes and how they're a type of transportation, where sometimes you even get to change their positioning. That and the overall style of the visuals are definitely the main positives for me, but these are things that we'll see a lot more of later on. Number 18. The Sackbot Redemption. And already we have another sackbot oriented level, except this time I think the gameplay is a lot more fun and interesting. The main difference this time is that we're now in use of a Controlinator for the whole thing, which is actually a vehicle that we exclusively have control of in this level, so that's nice. There's actually a good number of interesting challenges here, all of which involve helping the sackbots get from one place to another, including building a bridge, creating a tunnel, and a lot of the time, just simply grabbing and moving them, usually while surrounded by electricity. This makes for some interesting risk-reward sometimes, because you can really pick up as many sackbots as you want all at once, which finishes the level faster, but also makes it much harder to control the vehicle. The only downsides for this level would have to be how sometimes the sackbots can fail in various ways when going up the pipes, and also that I'm not the biggest fan of being in a Controlinator 100% of the time. But overall, this level does have a pretty fun concept that's executed extremely well. Number 17. Into the Heart of the Negativitron. I think it's a little sad that the final boss of the entire game isn't higher on the list, but this is how it is. Don't get me wrong, this is a super dramatic and epic finale to the story of the game, and really, it's been constructed perfectly. It feels amazing finally getting to have the one-on-one with the Negativitron, which creates some really great moments, like flying through the air to land straight on a sweet spot, quickly running in between the super fast lasers to narrowly survive, and most importantly, falling in low gravity while the calm music plays to take out the very heart of the boss. It's all just presented super well and makes for a pretty satisfying ending. It's just that, like a few other levels, the gameplay is the one thing that holds it back from being near the top. There are 3 main sections to this level, and pretty much all 3 of them feel like an auto-scroller in one way or another. The hamster section is the least like this, just because the time in between cycles is so brief that you can pretty much take out the brain immediately. But in the grappling hook section, there's nothing you can do. You just have to survive through 4 different 20-second periods until you can hit the brain each time, which is a bit of a drag despite how fun it is to use this power-up. The final section is similar, where there are 4 main cycles to wait through until hitting a brain at the end of them, except this time it takes 3 minutes to get through the whole thing. And while it does get a bit more interesting with how it speeds up, I just feel like there could have been more. The cycles didn't even change patterns or anything. Number 16. Waste Disposal. I appreciate this level for what it is because I feel like it's pretty unique for this world, while still fitting in with the other Clive levels. It's quite cool seeing other parts of the factory like this that you wouldn't normally think about, and it's done really well here. All of the fire really makes you feel like you're in some massive incinerator, and having to make your way through all of the piles of rubbish is just really fun for some reason, where a lot of the time you're actually being dropped into a dumpster. The various mechanical arms that you hold onto are really cool with how they're automated, and it really helps add to the theme. As for gameplay, I actually think this level has a lot to offer. The cycles at the beginning are fun to go through, and the little layer changing sections are also pretty cool. There are sackbots in this level, but the way they're used this time is actually really creative and amusing, having to swing off a chain of them like a rope. The little conveyor belts are neat, and the puzzle in the ×2 area is surprisingly fun as well. I quite like the small platforms that slowly disappear while sitting in the fire. It's something I'm surprised wasn't used in more levels. Overall, this stage is really solid with a good theme and a variety of things to offer. Number 15. Foul Play. I'm always going to think of this level as what Skulldozer should have been, as they were somehow able to take the very concept that made that level so boring, and turn it into one of the more memorable and fun levels in this game. And that concept being, run away from the giant monster that's chasing after you. But there's a lot more going on that makes this level so fun. The grapple hook is a really important element here, as it's pretty impressive the kind of speed you can get sometimes, and the bounce pads allow for a greater number of movement options. I also really like all of the sackbots that are there with you running away as well. It makes it all feel so much more chaotic. And Copernicus, the giant turkey, is actually a pretty big threat. It moves quite quickly, and you don't even respawn if it catches you. The level just ends. And as if this wasn't already enough for a great level, just when you think it's over, Copernicus comes back but completely on fire for one last chase, but this time without the grappling hook. This is probably the best level in the game in comparison to how simple it actually is. Number 14. Pipe Dreams. I've already mentioned how much I like the use of pipes in levels, so it's probably obvious that I like this one too. This level continues the same kind of theming from Maximum Security, but I think it's better here as it feels a bit more open. It's also a lot nicer having the sackbots now follow you. It makes it a lot easier and more fun to work with them in my opinion, and it's amusing watching them fly through the pipes when you go past them. In general, this level is quite simple, but that's only part of why I like it. Some highlights for me are the bounce pad section with the closing walls, the levers that control the hand, and the entire ending section. I know it's in some other levels, but actually rewarding the player with prizes based on how many sackbots they were able to save is a really cool feature. Number 13. Fireflies when you're having fun. The first half of this level is probably my favourite section in the whole game visually. I love how it starts dark in this blue light, but then goes into an even darker section, where the only way to see is by using the glowing fireflies as they go past, making for some super pretty lighting that actually adds a lot to the gameplay as well. The music is just perfect for this section too. We then see the daylight shining through the exit, which looks super cool, where once we come out, it's time to start using the grappling hook, which is always made more interesting when combined with moving objects or bounce pads. The second half of this level continues using this power-up, but this is where everything becomes very cycle heavy, which isn't my favourite thing depending on how it's done. Thankfully it's not too bad here since you're rarely just sitting around. Even on the elevator ride it can be hard to dodge the fireballs. Also, these plants with the bounce pads are super cool. I also have to say that the multiplayer section here is another really interesting one, where you're able to create different paths of the firefly to get the prizes. The section with the grapple targets that get set on fire is pretty interesting, as it forces you to let go, which is something I'm not sure if we've seen before this. We then see some meanies, which sets up some more of the story, but this is again just one of those levels that's really nice visually, while also being decently fun and interesting. Number 12. Where in the world is Avalon Centrifuge? This level has very similar visuals to Full Metal Rabbit, which again I'm not the biggest fan of, but I do have to say that there's a lot more going on in terms of colour with the yellows and reds, making it feel very warm. There's even a lot of purple which goes pretty well with it. So actually, I do kind of like how this level looks, and most of it is really fun too. The first part has us using the grappling hook quite a lot to get past several obstacles with the help from some sackbots, who are a pretty nice addition. It actually makes you feel like you're the leader of a team and not just a babysitter like usual. Most of the level is just killing enemies, but it's actually surprisingly challenging and not always straightforward. A lot of the enemies are able to move towards you, and the flamethrower section can be pretty tight with the route you have to take. The start of the second part is more of the same, aside from being on an elevator, and the enemies here are made so that they can only be killed at specific times, which makes it a lot more interesting. The design of this one enemy is quite cool, but this is where we start the boss fight. I really love how it sets the tone, with Avalon being grabbed by a giant hand and the ground exploding around you until revealing the giant robot that you have to climb up, which was actually shown a bit earlier in the level too. But this is just such a cool design for a boss section, as all of the different parts are pretty challenging to climb up and look natural for a robot to have. My favourite part has to be using the bounce pad on the hand at the right time, and then going into the head to defeat the whole thing. It's also nice having some other characters help us out, making for a pretty fun and well designed level that's also quite challenging. Number 11. Bravery Test. This level's gimmick has to be one of the more amusing ones that are in the game, which is simply having these blocks push outwards when you get close to them, which technically doesn't make them any different to any other solid surface, but it's still fun to use them. Oftentimes they're used to save you from falling into a pit, or just by blocking you off, like right at the beginning. The time sections with the electricity are also pretty cool and give a nice sense of urgency with the big on-screen timers. The level probably could have just been made up of these few things, but this is only the halfway point. From here, you get shot out of a cannon and you actually get to see a lot of stars for a moment, which is very unusual for this world, so it's nice to see. But this is where the grappling hook section starts. It's not much that we haven't seen before, but the level forces you to do several blind drops to test your abilities with the power-up, which makes sense given the name of the level. Then finally, it all ends with a brief zipline, which is simple but always fun, where it's then quite satisfying to see the level come full circle back to the scoreboard that was at the beginning. I just enjoy every single part of this level, which is all designed well, especially with the moving blocks that still make me think they won't save me from dying. Number 10. Casa del Higginbottom. These Eve levels that take place in a darker environment are always more visually appealing in my opinion, but this one is a standout to me because of all of the things that glow, such as the water targets, the fire, and especially the spinning flowers that are in the background because of all of the colours, not to mention the literal rainbow at the very end of the level. There's also some other amusing visual elements, like the paper planes and the clothesline that falls down, with the super calming music that goes well with all of it. This is also our first proper Creatonator level on the list, with the projectile being water, which has some pretty cool applications. It can grow bridges, take out enemies, activate platforms, and most importantly, extinguish fire. It's a cool mechanic having fire that spreads unless you take out all of it, where it can even affect the bounce pads. This level even has a boss fight, and while being pretty straightforward, it fits right in being just a big plant that's on fire, and it's a fun way to end the level. Number 9. Current Affairs. This level is definitely the weirdest from Victoria's world, as all of a sudden it's like we've stepped into Frankenstein's laboratory, with lots of electricity and creatures being experimented on everywhere. It's pretty creepy, but it works well for a level's theme. The electricity is actually the main gimmick of the level, as it does a lot throughout the whole thing. A lot of the time it's travelling along a path that you have to keep track of to be able to avoid it, which is just a really fun obstacle and not something that's been done with electricity before. But not only that, it's also able to power other elements of the level, such as these elevators and other platforms, where at the end you're constantly being shot upwards by them, and even racing the electricity to not die. Sometimes it also activates these metallic spheres to create an arc, which is just a really cool hazard. The ×2 minigame is an extension of this too, where you have to work together with someone to keep the electricity alive for long enough, which is really fun, and the two faces are also pretty creepy. The enemies also make up a good amount of this level, where they appear periodically throughout, but mainly at this snaking section, which is a nice layout, and towards the end where you actually have to use them to bounce over the last obstacle. I just love it when games make you use enemies as platforms. I'm surprised they don't do it more. Then finally, to end the level, the big plug is pulled out of the machine that was creating the enemies, which is quite satisfying. Number 8. The Cakeinator. This level makes for a pretty good introduction to the Creatonator for the player, with how many applications get shown off with each obstacle. Some of the things that it's used for includes lowering bridges, creating platforms, blocking layer changes, weighing things down, jamming gears, and even killing enemies, making for a pretty impressive amount of variety from a single function. Obviously it makes a lot of sense that it uses cakes, but it's nice having a projectile that isn't primarily a weapon. But along with the gameplay, the setting is really solid too, where we find ourselves inside of kind of a factory. You wouldn't think that the industrial elements like the conveyor belt and gears would fit in so well with the cake theme, but surprisingly it does, which makes for some pretty unique visuals. And it doesn't just stick to one thing either. You move across cake, icing, wooden drawers, and even melting chocolate near the end. There's just so much food everywhere. I like the yellow and pink part in particular. The ×2 section is quite simple, but it uses the mechanic involving weight again, which is pretty fun. The only gameplay element I would have liked to see more is blocking gears to stop them from spinning. For some reason, that's just really cool. It's also a really nice detail having the cakes use the popper color. It lets you tell whose is whose when there are multiple players. This level just has so many fun things to do in it while still being visually and thematically pleasing. Definitely worthy of being in the top 10. Number 7. Set the controls for the heart of the Negativitron. The first part of this level is really quite short, but there's still a lot going on. We get our first look at the inside of the spaceship, which in itself is a clean looking setting, but we also get to see the first instance of altering gravity, which is the main theme of this level. We then go into what seems like an arcade room with lots of different games that you can actually play, some of which even rewards you with prizes. This is one of those things that totally wasn't necessary, but its inclusion is highly appreciated. It's just really cute and fun. Once the level really starts though, the gravity switching becomes much more apparent. It's another one of those gimmicks which is quite simple, but it still adds enough interest to the gameplay, as often there's risk of being squished. Then the Negativitron appears, and this is where the level really starts, because from here, all gravity is significantly lower, which is pretty much the only level to do this, making for a lot of unique obstacles. Of course, a lot of this is just jumping over tall objects and big gaps, but having to swing off of spinning wheels and navigate through debris is just super fun in low gravity. We even get to use bounce pads in a few sections, so it's really cool seeing how they behave under these conditions. The visuals also change for this part of the level, with everything taking on a darker red tone, which is appropriate for what's going on. The music also changes to feel like you're on a futuristic mission. It's not really something I'd expect during an emergency like this, but it's really cool. Then for the final part of the level, we go back to gravity flipping, except this time we get to control it directly via a controlinator, which again, I'm surprised isn't something that's done in more levels. But it's okay because there's a good number of things to do here. Pushing blocks, dodging obstacles, solving puzzles. The falling scoreboard at the end is also a really nice surprise. This level feels like it has so many different sections, so it never gets old. Number 6. Invasion of the Body Invaders. It's probably surprising seeing this level so high up on the list, considering how I placed the other levels that primarily used a controlinator, but I just think that it's done really well here. Unlike most other boss levels, we actually get an entire section before the fight to learn how to control ourselves and get used to the environment. Our controlinator gives us free up and down movement, but this time, instead of a projectile, we can instead grab and release this white blood cell to destroy obstacles, which is one of several things that makes this level good. It's super satisfying fighting the boss this way because of how the blood cell can pierce through to reward you with a number of hits, making it a really fun challenge to see how many you can take out with a single shot. This also has to be one of the most unique environments in the game, which is inside of a character's body. This is definitely something that could have just come across as really unpleasant, but it actually fits the game's style super well with how cartoonish it is. And honestly, it just looks really cool. I didn't even notice for a while that the fight takes place in the brain. This level also uses the song Vision 1, which is definitely a standout in the soundtrack for me. And despite sounding very digital, it fits in pretty well in a level where everything we're touching is organic. Number 5. Bang for Buck. Here we are back in the factory setting, and there isn't much more to say about it this time around, but this level still offers quite a number of interesting and fun mechanics. It's nice to have at least half of a level that's focus is centered around explosives, as I feel like there isn't much of that in this game. And here we even get to pick them up and throw them around, which is pretty fun. Later, they're even used as a zipline, which is an amusing thing to do considering how delicate they are. The next most interesting thing about the first half of this level are these unique enemies that track where you are to shoot fire at you. On their own, these are already pretty cool, but actually having to guide them to shoot in specific areas is really interesting, as it can be pretty challenging not getting hit by them while still having the fire land where you want it to. I have to say though, it's the second half of this level that really does it for me, which pretty drastically changes the tone. It starts off completely silent, but as soon as you pull that lever, it's like everything comes to life, with the sack boss jumping around and the song I Have Changed starting up. It just feels like a fun change from the rest of the levels in this world. The thing with the sack boss is just really cute too, with how they're attracted to this holographic lady. The whole thing going perfectly with the song as the sack boss are kind of changing their mood, I guess. Combining this with the bomb elements from earlier ties it all together. The zip lines are even longer this time. But the ending section where you're trying to beat the timers will always be exhilarating. I also like the bounce pad sections, and it's nice being rewarded for saving the sack bots like in other levels. Number 4. Gripple Grapple. Of course the level that showcases the most fun power-up is going to be one of the best, which is pretty good for only the 4th level in the game. This is one that I might actually not have much to say about, just because its concept is that simple. The entire level is just a series of unique obstacles that involve using the grappling hook and sometimes even bounce pads, which when combined together make for some really cool challenges. There really aren't many things in this game that are more fun than perfectly chaining a number of swings together while conserving all of your speed like you can do in this level. This makes practicing it super rewarding, as there are some pretty advanced tricks you can do just by using your momentum in the right way. Some highlights for me are the snaking section followed by the run afterwards, and hitting the bounce pad on the side to get speed to then fly across the next section. I would love to have an entire story mode just based around layouts like this, it's just that fun. Number 3. Runaway Train. I wonder if this level was inspired by some community levels that came before it. Regardless, navigating a moving train and jumping between carriages is an idea that never gets old, and it makes for a super fun level in LBP. Oh, and this is also the introduction to the Grabinators, where they've given us quite a few different uses for them. As well as grabbing and throwing objects, we also have to use a block as a buffer to press a button, clear out a path through cake, and even throw enemies if you want to. As mentioned before though, this level's focus is making it to the front of the train by moving through each carriage, all of which have unique challenges. Like an unfinished staircase and needing to protect Jam, which gives us a rare scenario where you actually need to avoid a bounce pad. I really love how when you move across the roof there are billboards that get in the way. That combined with the moving objects in the back and foreground really sell the illusion of the moving train and just make it all look so good. It's also neat having a little top hat wearing boss at the end, and the rhythm of the music really emphasizes the movement that's going on. The end of the level also directly transitions into the next one, which is something that I missed from the first game. Number 2. Patience are a virtue. This is another level that's centered around a relatively simple mechanic, but manages to be really fun anyway, which is the Water Creatonator from Casa del Hickenbottom. Except this level did it first. A lot of the obstacles are similar, with needing to put out fire and extend platforms, but this level just does it in a way that makes it feel so much more fun, and I think it's mostly because of the music. The song that plays in this level makes me feel like I really am solving everyone's problems by putting out the fire, while still being able to have a ton of fun while doing it. The part with the growing platforms is really cool, and it's funny shooting the squirrel with the water. Another pretty important part of this level though are the evil sackbots, which like to make surprise appearances throughout the whole thing, which can be exciting. The dark areas towards the middle of the level are also really nice and helps break everything up into sections. I like the visuals a lot here with the lighting and colours, and it's really cool using the water tongues as a staircase to go both up and down. After this is the fireball section, which is interesting because you have to do the opposite of everything before, where setting objects on fire as you progress. And this is done through another new function, which is pushing objects instead. I didn't mention them before, but the spinning fans throughout the level are a nice element with how fast you can push them with the water. But the big domino section is definitely the highlight for the ending of the level, where then travelling across these moving platforms gets you to the scoreboard. Another interesting but unimportant thing in this level are all of the story characters from LBP1 that make appearances throughout the whole thing, except they look a lot different. I'm assuming they're like that because of the Negativitron, so it makes for some good motivation to keep going. But really, they just make the level stand out a lot from all of the others. Number 1. Brainy Cakes. One thing that I've always really liked about this level is its length. It's long enough to learn the gimmick and have fun with it, but not too long where it starts to get boring, as I feel like there's a few levels that are longer than they need to be. The gimmick of this level is quite a simple one, with just needing to grab and throw these cakes at the right times, but this actually allows for quite a lot of unique obstacles. The cakes are primarily used as a zipline to not fall past the metal, which is quite fun, but also interesting with how it takes away Sackboy's jump, as this adds another level of skill in some sections. In the second half of the level, there are moments where you actually get quite a lot of speed and need to pretty precisely time when you let go of the cake to not die. It can also be fun getting into a rhythm with the spoon catapults. The other thing they're mostly used for is killing enemies, which is quite simple but satisfying to do with how big the target is and the explosion afterwards. My favourite thing about this level though is the theming, as I think it's the best one that represents Victoria's world, with the pinkish background and all of the flowers and bushes combined with the industrial elements from the Victorian time period. The level also shows the corruption of the Negativitron in a cool way with the bright pink waterfalls, especially that part with the Sackboy statue with eyes. The end of this level does have something of an auto-scroller, but with how fast-paced it isn't boring at all, and it also fits the theme being inside of an oven. This level also just uses my favourite interactive track in the game. It's surprisingly epic, partly because of the a cappella, but this actually helps even more with fitting into the Victorian style. I think this level has the best and strongest theming in the game. So combining that with a really fun gameplay makes this one of the best overall. Like always, trying to narrow down items that have such incredible amounts of detail and depth to a single position in a list will always be difficult and never perfect. But regardless of my opinion, I hope that this has brought more insight to LittleBigPlanet 2 story levels for you to form your own thoughts about each one, and which might be your favourite. I'd love to read about what you think in the comments. And of course, a special thanks to Metroberry who made covers of 2 of the licensed tracks from the game for me to use. It really made this video special and fun to work on. And thank you for watching.